technology. Blue represents the sky. It represents the connection between the presidency, the sky, and the date. He couldn't have been telling us clearer if he'd actually spoken it in plain language. I'm concerned about the world ending, and I'm going to do everything in my presidency to try to keep that from happening in 2012. We got this extraordinary aircraft. Timeless, classic, exquisite, tasteful even now. It does not look dated. It does not look from the 60s. It could have been rolled off the Boeing assembly line yesterday, with, of course, this crucial tail number representing to anyone who knows, through this designer, what Kennedy was really trying to do. And irony of ironies, Air Force One carried him to his final rest. So the death of Camelot, the death of JFK, has within it all kinds of elements leading to where we can go now. Because when you go to the White House Museum, you find this curious set of statements. Bodine's renovations were not quite complete in the West Wing in November of '63 when President Kennedy was assassinated. The turnover was so rushed, Mrs. Kennedy never got a chance to see the final Oval Office. It was completed while the couple were literally in Dallas. And when the president was killed, they took everything out before she got back, so she never saw what Bodine planned and implemented in the Oval Office. Wait till you see. This is a president who is so at home, so comfortable. By the way, Kennedy had back pains. This looked like a guy with back pains. He's sitting in one of those captain's chairs. He had two captain's chairs arranged on both sides of the Resolute desk. This is a National Geographic globe behind him. This is the blue, green, teal Truman rug that Eisenhower just kept. The president gets $100,000 every year to redecorate the personal quarters and living, functioning spaces like the Oval Office. Nobody used it from Truman up to Kennedy until Kennedy decided that Jackie would be able to do what she wanted with the White House. So here's a guy really at home in his office. Remember, I live in my office. I don't know how many of you spend 24/7 in front of your computer, but I live in my office. If I had something in my office that bothered me, I would change it, because when your environment is so connected to your work, when you're there, when you're living and eating and breathing basically the background that you are inhabiting, it becomes a really important expression of who you are. It must be in sync with who you are. The Oval Office had to be in sync with who John F. Kennedy was, which is why when I saw this picture, I said, oh my God, because this was his office, and this was what Bowden designed and put in place when they were gone. That brief weekend, this atrocious office became the Oval Office of the Presidency of the United States for a president who did not like red. Now, as soon as I put this together, I said to myself, okay, who had the power, with Jackie and Jack missing, to order the Oval Office completely redone that weekend? And there was only one man, Lyndon Baines Johnson. And that Bodine was acting as his agent. That's the only thing that made sense. And Mike and I sat in front of the screen, and I said to Mike, why don't you go to the White House thing, because if I start looking around, making calls, people freak out. So I've had to get a little smarter. I have to have other people do some digging for me. Well, Mike kind of got busy, he's out there building spacecraft for Northrop Grumman and, having a good social life in LA. And he never really got around to making a couple of calls to the history office. I found this, which was so endemic to my perceptions of Kennedy, having done the white paper on the web earlier last year, looking at this whole detente between these two gentlemen, which would have changed the world for the better if they had been allowed to proceed. And I'm looking at this comparison. I'm looking at, this is what Kennedy could live with up until 63. Obviously, he liked the blue. He loved the drapes. He loved the decor. He was so at home. You saw him in this chair, casual in his own office. This would have been such an anathema. Just from my own instincts, he could not have stood being in a room covered in blood. Because that's what it is. And in the White House History Museum, it again reiterates that Kennedy did not see this because it was completed that weekend. He was in Dallas, and whoever had it done knew he would never be coming back, that he would never have to live in that office because it wasn't being designed for him. It was being designed for his successor, a guy who, in fact, did like red and kept the carpet up until the end of his first term. Only he did something else. Look at this. The rocker. That is the same rocker that Kennedy had. It's been reupholstered. It's got new cushions. It's been refurnished. The old veneer taken off and the new whatever put on. But how do we know it's the same? You look down here at the bevels here, and you look at the knobs, and you look at this. Same knobs, same bevels. It's the same rocker. His successor had to use the throne of the king who had been killed, who was his predecessor, who he could not stand. And he kept the carpet. So, when we look on Air Force One, we see, of course, this classic photograph taken of the swearing in, the blood-spattered Jackie standing there in the suit that she was determined not to change for symbolic reasons. Judge Sarah Hughes. There's a curious little footnote to history which Jim Mars, who right about now should be presenting the same data over at the Assassinations Conference in Dallas, which I find eerie, he tells me that the reason that everything got held up, Johnson wanted to be sworn in on Air Force One, but they had to wait 2 hours. And Sarah Hughes, when she finally showed up, they were lifelong friends. She said, "I'm sorry, Lyndon, but I couldn't find a copy of the swearing-in ceremony for the president to assume, or the vice president to assume the duties of the president." And Lyndon reached inside his pocket and handed her a copy. This is a federal judge who spent 2 hours looking all over Dallas and couldn't find one, and Johnson had one to give to her. Then there's this photograph, taken moments after the other photograph. This is the head of the House Committee on Space, and here's Johnson, and he's winking at Johnson, and Johnson obviously is grinning or smiling or winking back at him. This guy was the one who introduced legislation in the House of Representatives forbidding the United States from cooperating with the Soviet Union in any lunar landings or activities unless there was a congressional vote, overwhelming positive vote in that direction. So why did Kennedy pick Johnson? Well, in this book written by Sally Bedell Smith, Grace and Power, there is this most extraordinary set of references. Johnson told Claire Booth Luce, who, as you know, was the wife of the guy who founded Life magazine and Time magazine and all that, she told him that he confided a rationale for accepting the vice presidency because he said, "I looked it up, and 1 out of every 4 presidents has died in office. I'm a gambling man, darling, and this is the only chance I got." That is on the record. And a bunch of other stuff. But the most telling piece of information to me is the color of that rug and the fact that Bodine had decorated the cabinet room and the Oval Office. However, when his reservation was not quite complete, he completed it that weekend. Now, here's the important link. in the commission of a crime,